We are ready to rock and roll. I am so excited for this episode. As everyone can see on the screen right now, I'm joined in our studio with Rabbi Moshe Benovitz. Thank you so much for joining me.
Amazing to be here. Not the first time, but first time in this beautiful studio, and very excited to have another conversation with you.
I'm pumped, likewise. And I want to just jump straight into the conversation and to your story, because there's a lot we're going to discuss today about obviously how you got to the top of NCSY and all the work that you've been doing with youth in America, in Israel. So let's just take us back to the beginning of your life and we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Happy to do it. Always working to be aspirational, not at the top of anything, certainly not at the top of NCSY, but it's a journey. It's a journey. We're always trying to kind of rise and grow up, make aliyah in all of our different ways, not just geographically to the land of Israel, but also geographically to the land of Israel. And it's a process. Excited to get into a lot of it.
Amazing. So let's hone in specifically on your early childhood years. I know you had a lot of informative experiences, a lot of figures in your life that you've looked up to, and a lot of experiences, I guess, that helped you lead, yourself to Israel. So take me through the I would say first 18 years of your life, and kind of we'll go from there.
Great. I could talk about that forever. I won't, but it's very much connected. You mentioned about the things that led me to the land of Israel and the things that were formative for me in my childhood. I'm a very, very proud member of the community I grew up in, and even more proud member of the home that I grew up in, the family that I grew up in. I was extraordinarily blessed to be nurtured, educated by very, very special people who I am exceptionally close to and that I have a relationship with, and that who shared and imparted values, mostly implicitly, sometimes explicitly, but mostly implicitly. They shared the values that I cherish and carry with me to this day. That started in the nuclear family. That started in the home that I had. My mom and my dad, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who passed away about just over a year ago. They were and continue to be my father posthumously, and my mom going strong still, thank God, in Yerushalayim. They are the most significant influences on my life. And there were values in our home. There were ideas that they cherished that were important to them that shaped me. There were expectations. It was not a tiger mom type of situation. It wasn't a particularly strict or austere upbringing, but there were rules. And much, much more important than rules, and this goes back to my grandparents. I never met my grandfather, my father's father. I'm named for him, but I had the privilege of having a relationship with my other three grandparents, Zichronam Livracha, and they all had expectations, always. They had absolute love and a tremendous amount of support for all of us, but they had expectations and they had values. They had things that they cared about and that were part of their language, that were part of the way in which they communicated with us and the way they supported us. The other part of the story, we can get back into the family parts, later, was the fact that I'm a proud resident. Grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. That was very, very different than the Teaneck, New Jersey of today. It was the formative years of that type of community, where there was only one option, and it wasn't going to grow and explode the way that it has based on real estate prices or based on landscaping companies. It was going to grow based on the fact that there was a message of values that resonated, that was communicated by so many of the Rabbanim and so many of the Balabatim of the community as well. Rabbi Yosef Adler was also Zecher Tzadik Livracha. He passed away earlier this year. He was the Rav of the shul that my parents helped found and start in Teaneck, New Jersey, Rinat Yisrael. Later on, of course, was the principal of TABC for many, 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 many years. Rabbi Adler was a person who spoke in the language of values, but also in the way that those values could be communicated to the common man. Rabbi Adler is often referred to as a master pedagogue, but that the definition of that, I don't think a lot of people know, not just because it's a big word that scares people.
Never heard it.
But it's it means to know how to teach. And I don't think that's limited to classroom tricks and methodologies, although that's part of it for sure. To be a great teacher is to establish a connection both between teacher and student, but also between values and life, and to be able to make those ideas practical. And that was a massive part of my upbringing, to be in a community that had values. That's an interesting thing to be able to say. A community that cared about things that went beyond materialism and went beyond getting ahead in life, but actually making something of your life. And that was extremely, extremely important to me. And all those things led me to anything that I've ever done or anywhere I've ever gone.
I can only imagine because, obviously I could attest to what you're saying because Rabbi Adler, Zechron Levarcha, who passed away earlier this year, as you mentioned, he was the principal when I was, in his high school, and I've seen the teaching style. I've seen the way he brings Torah to life and connects Judaism to people, and it's really special. And obviously, I'm sure you took a lot from him. And growing up in Teaneck, however many people are watching this, that may or may not know, there's a big fundamental, I guess you could say, aspect of growing up in the modern Orthodox community of you finish your time in high school and then you essentially take the jump to Israel. So for you growing up, obviously you had a great system in America, in Teaneck, teachers around you and everything. And then obviously you finish high school and now you have to, make the jump to come to Israel. And I know a lot happened in your time in the beginning of your yeshiva year in Israel. So take me through essentially going from high school to Israel, and we'll kind of jump in through that aspect of your life.
Well, the initial foray into Israel, obviously there were a couple of vacations and trips and tours that happened before that, but it was a gap year. I had the privilege of studying Karen B'Yavneh. That was during the time of the Gulf War, and it was a very, very interesting year and a very exciting one to be here. Exciting in the best of ways. I don't mean just because it was sensational and it was headline making, but it was an exciting time to be in Israel because of the way in which values were brought to life and exposed, which is, the heart and soul of what a yeshiva is supposed to be. After I finished an MTA, which also included a year in YU, that was in those days, the early admissions program in Yeshiva University. And that would have been my senior year in high school, the equivalent of that. So that I spent 2 years in Karen B'Yavneh after that. And that was a new introduction to different personalities and similar, but a different set of values that were applied specifically to the land of Israel and the destiny of the Jewish people, and the notion of having a homeland and a connection that runs so incredibly deep. That was a huge, huge part of my journey and step, and that was the first introduction. After that, I went back to Yeshiva University. There was some discussion about that, but that's where I happily and enthusiastically ended up and learned there for a number of years. I taught in Berea High School at MTA and in DRS, all of which are in the tri-state area, all of which are in the United States. And then after approximately 8 years of teaching and working with NCSY throughout, we decided to make Aliyah, and we've been here for the past 23 years. And there's a seamlessness to all of those stops and to that entire journey. I think one of the biggest challenges we have when we speak about Aliyah and when we try to define a person's relationship with the land of Israel through the parade or through the Yom Ha'atzmaut events or the guest speakers that we may have, is that you're talking about an awkward and artificial imposition onto what is actually the values of our life. When we are speaking about or introducing something new to the equation, there are very, very few times where that's going to be successful, where that's going to work. I actually would like to give you kind of 3 examples of how that plays its way out, because it really, the more awkward and the more of an imposition the value is, the less likely it is to take hold. I think that's true in virtually all endeavors of growth, particularly when it comes to religious growth. My favorite example, which on the surface has nothing to do with Israel, would probably have to do with just general religious practice. People often refer to halachic observance and Jewish lifestyle, whether it's keeping Shabbos or kosher or going to minyan in the middle of a football game, on a winter's Sunday afternoon, making sure that you go to minyan, even though the Giants and the Eagles are in, the fourth quarter headed to overtime, but it's 4:20 in the afternoon and you had to have mincha there. So sometimes people refer to Judaism as a burden. There's a question about, do I have to go to mincha or do I want to go to mincha? Whether parents should be able to say, one of those things. There is actually a great deal of legitimacy and importance in describing our obligation to go to mincha, both as a have to and as I want to. And there can be a debate, a healthy debate about the primacy of each of those, which is more important, given the fact that we're supposed to have both attitudes and both relationships with it. But here's what I don't think is debatable and doesn't get enough attention. Whether we refer to it not as a burden or a privilege, but we refer to it as an imposition. Is mincha knocking me off my game? Is mincha disrupting the regular flow of my life? And when it is, and this is actually, Mincha as an example of this, I think is particularly true because Mincha is a tefillah that for everyone takes place kind of in the middle of their day. The more that it's an abrupt departure of what I've been thinking and doing before, the less likely it is to be successful. Sure, the times it is successful, it's radically successful because it creates this type of revolution and upheaval. We cannot live lives of revolution and that type of back and forth. It has to have a flow. It has to have a rhythm. It has to have, this type of harmony with it. And we miss that. And we miss the toll that it takes on our community and on our children very often. It's very, very hard for people to embrace or accept something which is inconsistent with the way in which they live their lives all the time. It has to be something that kind of flows more naturally. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of proper Israel education. It's certainly one of the things that I'm most grateful for. When you're introducing something that is different than what you are and that is fundamentally disruptive to the values you've been taught to have, it's going to have minimal traction. It's going to have minimal success. But when you're able to talk about ideas and values and let them kind of run their course, a person who truly believes in the Jewish people and in the promises, biblical and otherwise, that take place, that God offers to us about our destiny, about the definition of home, will naturally end up choosing to live in a place like this. And a person who doesn't is going to be mired and stuck for a very long time in all likelihood.
Wow. Okay. There's a lot I want to unpack. And as you're saying before, and when you kind of went through a little bit of your journey, your family started off in America and then you found your way to Israel, obviously, right? So, when you came for your year in Israel and when you were growing up, it seems that you were given this education of not necessarily like, yeah, move to Israel, move. It was more just essentially, it came off in a very natural way from what I'm taking from you of this is something we value. And if you value it enough, you'll essentially find your way there. So for yourself, did you always process that when you were in your early years saying like, you know what, yes, I understand what people are teaching me. I think I do end up wanting to live my life in Israel?
So, the answer is a very emphatic yes and no. On a deep level, the answer is for sure yes. It was never foreign, pun intended. It was never a foreign concept to me. Why or how or what? It was never any sort of far away, exotic type of option or possibility. It was never for other people. It was always very, very deep inside. On a practical level, I did not wave an Israeli flag or, Google Nefesh B'Nefesh before Nefesh B'Nefesh existed and know on this date I'm going and I'm never coming back and that's when it's going to happen. There was something that was more deliberate about it, patient, maybe not in a good way all the time, but it had to be right and it had to be, again, part of this flow and make sense on many, many levels in order to be able to do that. I would say there are a few incidents in my life that reflect that reality in a strong way. The first is that I and many of my peer group from Morashah Kollel, from the summers that I spent there, from the Yeshiva University-based managers for my class in MTA, I haven't actually done, although I would like to, the statistical analysis. I believe there's a disproportionate compared to others who had other educational experiences. I believe there's a disproportionate number of us who ended up making Aliyah. Somebody did once run the numbers on specifically those summers in Morashah Kollel, and it was staggering how many people had made Aliyah from my first summer there, from the base medrash that was there at the time. It's really, I think it might be close to 50% of the participants, which is obviously way above any other kind of sample size. Moshe would be very envious of those types of numbers of making Aliyah. What's remarkable is that I cannot remember a single time in which Aliyah, the land of Israel, were mentioned in that milieu and environment. I don't remember it ever coming up because the way in which it became such a part of our reality was these series of connections and this type of flow of ideas. That's the way that it happened. You believe in this, and this is a certain reality that you're living in, and these are the values that you believe in. How do those things impact and determine where you choose to live your life and where you choose to take a mortgage on and to where you choose to buy a house? So that was for sure, number one. Number two would be the fact that when I was dating my wife, we'll be celebrating our 32nd wedding anniversary, 31st wedding anniversary this summer, please God. And when we were dating, so she was of the mindset, much more than I was on a practical level, that she was going to be making Aliyah shortly, and that she was only going to be dating guys who were of like mind. Why would you create that type of friction or challenge? Best to just date guys who are going to have that same mentality. Either she was misinformed, or she was outright, lied to, or she forgot to ask at the right time. Because on our second or third date, it was clear that we were not fully aligned in this way. And she agreed to continue dating, and ultimately she agreed to marry me. And we got married, thank God, and we went through it. I am sure, and she has said as much also, that it was the connection on the value level that is what did it. Meaning you start from a place of, is this if I had said, not only am I going to Israel, but I've never understood the people that do. Why would a person ever make Aliyah? Or how is that connected to the values that I hold to? There's no therefore of, I've learned a lot of Gemara Bava Kama or Maseches Gittin, and therefore I am an ardent Zionist and I believe that Israel is the Jewish homeland. If I had lacked that type of perspective, I don't think she would have tolerated me. I don't think she would have. She would have agreed to do it. And that was the second time. And the third time, which I've spoken about many times in speaking presentations on Yom Yerushalayim or Yom Ha'atzmaut or on behalf of discussions about Aliyah, is it. And I really believe it's the only way that this can happen. And I think it's such an important thing to share with people this story. My wife and I, unbeknownst to each other, had a variety of experiences around the time of the Second Intifada. Right around the time of the turn of the century, we had a variety of experiences that moved us deeply and made us, in our own personal tefillos and our own personal work, we spoke about many things together, but maybe we were a little bit afraid. Maybe we wanted to work it out in our own minds first. We had not spoken to each other specifically about this. And there was one night, a very nondescript evening. There was nothing overly dramatic that was going on or taking place. And we were preparing to go to sleep, and the lights were off already. And the last words before we closed our eyes, that my wife said to me was, "Do you think it's time for us to leave?" And I said, "I do. I think it is." And she said, "So do I." And then we went, "Good night." And then we went to sleep. And that was the entirety of this debate and discussion. It wasn't a debate and it wasn't a discussion. It was just a confirmation. It was just an affirmation of values that we had always held, believed in, and that's what it was from beginning to end. The extent of it, the follow-up, other than details and figuring out which appliances to buy and when to schedule a lift and when to tell our employers and family, not in that order, was the next morning. She said, "That wasn't sleep talking. That was real. Yes, good, done. So we're moving. Yeah, we're going to move forward on this." And it doesn't have to be any more than that. Rav Moshe Weinberger tells about, I believe he tells it about Rav Leibel Eger, that he was, in the spirit of many of the Hasidic masters, he was a man who understood the value of Hineni Muchan, of L'Shem Yichud, of all the Hachanos. But when it came time to act, he acted with an alacrity and with a confidence that was the result of all of that preparation. I guess, I share a love for sports, but you see that all the time also. Steph Curry is a very deliberate type of shooter and has put in, Ray Allen, Steph Curry, whoever you want to choose as your example, hours beyond comprehension in preparing and in perfecting their form. But if they hesitate, a hitch in a shot for a moment when it comes time to actually do it, if they lack any degree of confidence, let's think about it a little bit more while they're in the air, that ball's not going in. You can see right away that little hesitation. Oh boy, you thought about it too much, and it's not. Spend your whole life working so that when it's time, you do it and you're ready to go.
I love a lot of the things that you just said, and especially that story about you and your wife, of how you both got to that point where like you valued living in Israel, and then as you said, like one night you're about to go to sleep, and it clicks in your mind, and then you're both on that same trajectory. But what you were saying before is a little bit about, and this is what I want to kind of touch on right now, about the way in which we're educated in our Jewish community of I guess you could say the value of Israel, or how much we maybe should be looking at Israel as, for the future. So, being someone that's involved, and we'll talk about how you're involved in the community in specifics, but what is it that you see about our community today that we could be doing differently in terms of educating the youth to value living in Israel?
Again, the funny part is that the number one way to do it is not to talk about the land of Israel. We have a fundamental problem, and this very well might steer the conversation into some of my other passions and some other points of analysis, and I think that would be appropriate and worthwhile to be able to do. We have in our community an enormous deficit of values-based education. We have, some people refer to it as orthopraxy, people who act Jewish. There's a Paul Rudd joke that he makes. Are you a practicing Jew? And his response is, yeah, practicing all the time. Some days I hope to actually be doing things, because he's not a particularly observant Jew. I'm not positive he's Jewish at all. I think he is, but I don't know one way or the other. There's something that was coined, I believe, on the Upper East Side a couple of decades ago of orthopraxy. I practice Orthodox Judaism. There is not a belief or a value that animates that practice. I do many things. I gain the benefits of a social community that is associated with that. I've had many students, and this is absolutely tragic, in that they will say straight out is that they enjoy the Jewish lifestyle. They enjoy the sense of community that is associated. They love the fact that their financial future is more secure based on the yarmulke that's on their head and the different ways in which they might have an interview or a job, and they could do those things. They could not articulate to you a single value that informs their experience. Many of our graduates of high school, if you ask them what is the values that they learned about, they would not be able to tell you, which is a strange thing for a graduate of our educational systems. And as I spoke about before, this is not putting blame on the schools at all, and it's not putting blame on anybody. This is what we are as a community. Our homes, what are the values of this home? What are the belief systems of this home? We are lacking for something like that. We teach actions more than we teach beliefs. We teach behaviors more than we teach ideas. And we do not spend enough time teaching values and teaching those fundamental things. It's interesting that one of the great examples of this, and I think actually one of the least controversial examples of this, is that one of the areas I think where there may be a misstep in the modern Orthodox community is that they actually experimented for many years, and many institutions did, in inverting this process. What do I mean by that? They said, what do you mean? Our values clearly are that parade in May and that we are proud supporters of the land of Israel. But if proud support of the land of Israel is your starting point, its resonance and its effectiveness not only won't be affected at teaching a version of Judaism that is beautiful and that is attractive and that is sustainable over many generations, and that has kept our grandparents and great-grandparents and all the way back to Har Sinai have kept us connected to that core of value. Not only will we not be successful creating that, you're not going to create that many Zionists. There are many points of shame that we have in the modern Orthodox community, but one of them, and Masa and the Israeli government have these statistics, more people make Aliyah from Lakewood than they do from many of our modern Orthodox communities. It's coming. They may not formally make Aliyah, and what they do when they get here with their Aliyah is also a topic for debate for maybe a different podcast. But it's a lot of people are, and we're not even creating Zionists when we start with Zionism, or we start with it has to start with addressing the main part, which is, what does it mean to be a Jew? What does it mean? What are the values that inform this school, this community, this household? What are the things that are part of what we speak about and part of what we care about? And that's how it works. That's the only way that it ever is going to work.
Wow. Very interesting statistic, by the way, that you said a second ago. And obviously, part of that is not relevant to this podcast, but there are people that come from a community where on the surface level, they don't really preach living in Israel, but at the end of the day, they probably end up coming to Israel more than people from the modern Orthodox world. So, for the people that might be listening to this, I don't know when I say the words NCSY, or don't know what you do a little bit more in involvement with, many kids in the community, because obviously, as people could tell from listening to you talk, you're very knowledgeable in terms of that. So give me and the listeners a little bit of an insight into kind of what your involvement is with NCSY, and we'll unpack that a little bit.
So I've been involved with NCSY. I walked into my first Shabbaton as a freshman in the fall, in November of 1986, and I've never left. I fell in love with something that was not corrective in a massive way. I fell in love with something that was incredibly valuable and important for reasons that later on I was able to articulate and pick up on in terms of why they were so important. And I've been fortunate enough to love what I do and therefore never work a day in my life, which is not really true, but it's certainly the love what I do part is very, very true. It's manifested itself for the past 33 summers. This will be the 34th of my work with NCSY Kollel. We had one hiatus summer where we were hardly operational due to COVID, but through wars and through other challenges, thank God we have been operational for the vast majority of those summers and thriving as an institution. And so many of the fundamental values of NCSY Kollel are representative of the greater Orthodox Union, NCSY, and our community, because that's what those institutions represent in the strongest way. And I do believe that all three elements are connected to each other very, very significantly. First of all, the non-judgmental acceptance of all Jews is something that Kiruv movements, Chabad, and NCSY for sure have embraced and are models for what so many other areas of our community could be part of it. Looking for reasons to say yes and to embrace, as opposed to being experts at how to say no and how to repel or expel, literally to expel from our schools, from our institutions, from our community, how to be able to do that. Once again, like I said about my grandparents at the outset, it doesn't mean that there are no expectations. It doesn't mean that there are no standards. It means that the starting point and the ultimate goal, both, it comes around in a full circle. The starting point and the end point is the fact that you have a place and a value. It's very Rav Cookian in its approach to being the entirety and the wholesomeness of the Jewish people. And it reflects some of these other points that we're making also. Point two is that NCSY represents the informal education side of our educational system. And informal education lends itself right away, the type of work we do in the summer, involvement in sports and with tours and with getting outside. It's interesting because we spoke a lot about Israel and we're proudly an Israel program, but we follow the same methodology. We do not view the main source of a teen's connection to the land of Israel being their opportunity to go on a tiol and see an amazing view or mountain. There are multiple dangers with taking that approach and believing that that's what's going to do it. One of those dangers is that they're very likely to fall in love with Thailand, Costa Rica, or Italy more than they'll fall in love with Israel. One can squint and try and say that we are physically and aesthetically the most beautiful country on the planet. There are certain sunsets and certain days and certain locations where maybe you could make that case. But on a whole, the beauty of the country is seeing a soul and seeing a value. And you could discover that value through relationships, through a Shabbos in Beit Shemesh or Ranana or Modi'in, where you see with families of Mesiras Nefesh, where the homes exude a certain level of value. And you could see it in the Beis Medrash, in the Torah that we learn and the values that we have that then become reflected on those gorgeous stones in Yerushalayim. You're seeing your values come to life. That's the Kedusha, and that's the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, of the land of Israel. That's what you're able to have there. So the informal education is the opportunity to go into that third point, which is to say, is there a soul? Is there a value that is hiding beneath, that is covered by these behaviors, these actions, and these projections that we are doing there? Is there a soul? Is there a discovery of that soul? And that soul carries with it automatically those values and those ideas that we've been referring to throughout the discussion.
I could personally attest, and that's what's cool hearing you say this, and hopefully by the time this episode comes out, the people that are on NCSY Kollel are going to be seeing you and I a lot, and the stuff that we're doing together this summer. But I've seen it through being obviously part as a camper and then as a staff through what a summer in Israel could do for someone. And the way in which you give a kid an experience of the trips that you do, and not only limiting it to those trips, it's the teachers and the everything comes together. So I was going to say, what is it about even coming to Israel for a few weeks for someone that's in high school, that's in a pivotal part of his life? Why is that so transformative?
There are a bunch of answers to that. Some on a practical but also fundamental level have to do with growth, age, adolescence, and some degree of independence and separation. If we had all of the other ingredients, but they were taking place within the kind of protective cocoon and bubble of our community, of our schools, and of our homes, we're not anti-families. We're not anti the beauty and the value, and they should go back for many, many years to their homes. But the Torah describes marriage as al-ken ya'azov ish es aviv v'imo v'davak b'ishto. That's not a one-way street of see you later, mom and dad, and I'll never have anything to do with you again. It's a necessary step of independence that allows for a union and a connection, not just between husband and wife, but between generations, between children and parents. V'heishiv le'vavos al banim v'le'v banim al avosam. You can't achieve that when one is completely overwhelmed by the presence of a parent or of a teacher or something like that. So on a practical level and on a fundamental level, you have the independence aspect to it. There is no place in the world like summer camp for the mentoring and role modeling and the roles of advisors and that critical aspect of education. The only thing that schools can learn from NCSY, borrow from NCSY, or utilize NCSY to complement their extraordinary efforts, whether it's a yeshiva in Yerushalayim or whether it's a high school in St. Louis, the only thing that they can, one of the main things, I should say, that they can utilize from NCSY is that role of advisors, that mentorship, that big brother, tried and true. And camps perfected it, and NCSY took it to the next level, and everybody emulates it now. But the opportunity is in the summer. When else do 16-year-olds get 6 intense weeks to spend time not with great Rosh Yeshiva only, not only with these luminaries in their lives, their parents and their grandparents, but with a cadre of 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds who literally speak their language. They know all of the slang. They've struggled with the exact same things, the same experiences, and represent to them an option, represent to them something different, something better, and something greater. Those are massive, massive parts of it. Most importantly, though, is what we've been speaking about the entire time. And what I mentioned in the context of my tribute to Rabbi Adler, and it certainly is a tribute to my own parents, my father, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, it just draws a connection from beginning to end. It's why we emphasize sports the way that we do. It's why we talk about life in the land of Israel. It's why the Kedusha, we're not afraid of Machane Yehuda or Ben Yehuda. There is a unique Kedusha to those places. It is life, but different. It is life, but elevated. It's not a monastery and it's not locked away somewhere. It's taking the wine of Kiddush and raising it up in our hands. The teens, the adults recognize, appreciate, and love that bridge and that connection. It's life. What it is, though, it's a vision of what a life can look like and what values can look like in a meaningful way. And when they encounter the same hot dog and the same World Cup on a big screen, as we'll do this summer, for one of the semifinal games, in all likelihood, and they encounter the same fun and the same love of music and the same. But it's different. It's elevated. It's something more and something special. And it's not an imposition and it's not disconnected from their life. It's integrated into their life, and Kedusha applies to it, and meaning and values can be expressed through it. They fall in love with it, and they want nothing else. One of the ways in which the Kiruv movement in general, and when I say Kiruv, I mean it in the broadest and least offensive, in the sense that we all are needing for that type of things, is the fact that society presents so few good options that are like that. There's so little that is attractive, even about the best of it, even about, a person whose entire life surrounds, we're filming this, before Game 4 of the Knicks and of the NBA Finals. But even one who imagines that ultimate nirvana is that Knicks championship, they're filled with a certain degree of emptiness, with the ugliness of post-game 3 of violence, and and even the players being like, all right, folks, this is messed up. Like, this is not, and that's not. It's the same people say about extremism. Don't say those are the crazy people. That's an indication that something in our society is amiss. Opioid addiction, gambling addiction, which is so prevalent in our community right now, and general mental health issues have created a reality where they are desperate for something that makes even a little bit of sense, something which provides a little bit of a genuine, soulful type of joy and happiness. So I believe that we, along with many, many others, are able to provide exactly such an experience and give them a taste of something that they've never had before, that is so much more beautiful and so much more attractive than anything else.
1,000%. And the summer in Israel, as you're saying, and this is the point that I want to kind of touch on, and then we'll build off of that, is that you're giving a kid an experience that you could take a kid to California and you could give him an awesome experience. You could do probably the same stuff in Israel, but there's something different. You get off the plane here, you smell the air, you see the people, you experience a hot dog, you watch a World Cup game, but it's in Israel, it's elevated to a certain capacity. And I think one of the things that makes, for example, NCSY Colo, the program that you work on, that we are working on together, and this is a huge aspect of the program, is sports, obviously. And sports, as you just touched on a second ago, could bring out a certain level of emotions within inside of people. And there's a certain level of, you feel invested into whatever it is that you're watching. And specifically within our community, sports plays a very, very big role. And I know some people, I think, call you the title of the sports rabbi, but I want to kind of transition into that a little bit of take me through what you see as, kind of sports in the Jewish community and what it is that we might be doing in a good way and what it is that we might be able to fix a little bit.
Yeah, it's a topic that I care about a lot. Not a big fan of the sports rabbi title for a whole bunch of reasons. Also because other people hold it. So I don't want to step on any of their toes at all. But I would never want to put sports before the rabbi aspect of it, and have it be, again, just a reflection of and a grounding in terms of what our values are, which is ultimately the answer to the extremely important, valuable question that you're asking right now, which is where does it go right and where does it go wrong? And the very existence of that question and the obviousness of the answers, that there are many places where we have gone astray and places where we could be doing so much better. There's such enormous potential. It makes it a painful question, because belief, and it's very easy to say, which we often do, rightly or wrongly, when it comes to, let's say, drugs, gambling, other types of vice, where we say, this is the Yetzer Hara, this is bad, and our mission has to be to do less of it, to get rid of it, to excuse ourselves, and to rid our community of this terrible thing. And there are certainly people, and who for good reason take that approach to sports. And they say, look at what it's doing to us. Look what it brings out on us. And we need to treat it like any other addiction, like any other vice, like any other tool of the Yetzer Hara. We are worse off. A very, very dear Rabbi of mine, Rabbi Ari Leibowitz, in speaking about gambling recently, he posed that extremely challenging question. And Rabbi Ari Leibowitz is one who fully understands the potential that exists in sports and the ability that it has to elevate us. But looking at all the things, most recently this gambling addiction and the way it's impacted our community, honestly, as a sports fan, it's offensive also. The number of people who describe the Knicks comeback against Cleveland purely in gambling terms was frightening to me. When I was a teenager, you would have been just awed by the sports element of it. But people who spent that time watching that game, making money or losing money based on live betting and the percentages of, you always wonder, like, who are the people that are following the ESPN, percent chance of winning, at this point. It's gamblers who are doing it. A sports fan, that's what makes it, 3% chance of winning, bring it on. This is why we're watching. But if the whole thing becomes monetized and it becomes part of this, and Rabbi Ari Leibowitz on this viral type of discussion that he had in Yeshiva University, he just posed the question towards the end. Are we at a point where our community would be stronger and better had we never picked up a basketball? Had we never had such a discussion? I still do often. I have actually a connection with him right now. The original Denny Avdia, and before Denny, I think the one who most people who know would agree was the greatest Israeli and probably the greatest Jewish basketball player ever was Doron Sheffer. Doron Sheffer had a journey, and he played in UConn. He played with Allen Iverson, against Allen Iverson. He played the same backcourt with Ray Allen, and he had national recognition against Iverson and on a backcourt with Ray Allen, just in terms of his basketball talent. Won championships in Israel, was drafted by the Clippers in the same draft as Iverson and Kobe, Peja Stoyakov, an amazing draft. He's right at the beginning of the second round of that draft. And Doron Sheffer got ill in his career in Israeli basketball, and he went through a lot during that time. And he discovered God at a certain point and is living a religious life in the Galil right now, right outside of Tzfat. And that's been his journey. And initially in that journey, it was an either-or proposition. He actually made the statement that I wish my life took an almost irrevocable bad turn when I picked up a basketball for the first time. I wish I had never he retired multiple times because of illness and because of his other concerns in life. But I think it was the second time that he retired abruptly, more or less in the prime of his career. He said, not only am I retiring, I wish I had never picked up a basketball in my life. And I criticized him for that. I criticized him to his face, and I criticized him, from afar in discussions. But I understood what he was saying and why he was saying it. And Rabbi Ari Leibowitz had a similar question. Would our community be better off if we had nothing to do with sports? If we didn't watch it and we didn't play it? Would TABC and DRS and EULA be better or worse yeshiva high schools? Would they have happier, stronger students and more religious students if they opted not to be part of it? By the way, this is not all hypothetical there. Chaim Berlin and Torah Vadas, Rabbi Dr. Jeffrey Gurok wrote a book about this, about the history of sports in America. And he talks about the dilemmas and the debates and the decisions that were made. The original Yeshiva League involved schools from across the spectrum. There were very few to choose from. The original Yeshiva League was the yeshivas of the right-wing world. And they said, we don't think this is gonna work for us at all. And we have to ask ourselves, those very questions. Doron Sheffer's end of the story is not only, as I often tell my students, is not only that he became what we refer to as a Baal Tshuva, it's that he now professionally does clinics and coaching and utilizes basketball to impart the very message. He would no longer say he wishes he never picked up a basketball that was going to draw him outside of himself and going to introduce to him values that are so foreign to the way he lives his life. So the potential is there, and it's so important that we do it right. Sports can teach us so much, and it could teach us things that it's very, very hard to learn in any other way. There are certain elements of preparation, of godless Adam, whether you're watching or playing them, where you could see what actualization of a person's own potential and the types of sacrifices that are essential to be successful. And as I've recently spoken about, the relationship between the individual and the collective, one can learn more about Tefillah B'tzibor and the deepest halachic and philosophical underpinnings of what it means and why we are so intent on davening with a minyan all the time. One can learn about that from the Knicks and the San Antonio Spurs, probably better than they can learn about it from virtually any other source. I've said for many years, I attended Game 6 of the 1996 World Series, the greatest sporting event that I ever attended live, the Yankees, clinching game. And that Yankee team and the fans that were there, because there's often a spillover effect, I remember thinking to myself when Mariano came to pitch the 7th and 8th innings of that game, John Wetland was the closer at the time, Mariano was not yet the closer, it was early in his career. I remember watching the crowd and watching the team respond to every one of Mariano's movements. And I remember saying to myself, and I'm not embarrassed about this, I said, oh, that's what Ki ish echad b'lev echad means. This whole stadium has transformed from 56,000 people into a single entity that are being utterly absorbed and connected by this maestro on the mound and the way in which he's He's bringing everything together and controlling it. So the values are there, and they can only be learned by sports. We go terribly wrong when we lose ourselves and when we lose all sense of proportions. There are other valuable values that are communicated in sports subliminally and then sometimes explicitly. Kill instead of help, defeat and conquer instead of join and connect with. Rivalries that are artificial. Again, I'd go back to, not that I'm making the biggest deal about it, but Knicks fans beating up Spurs fans, it's crazy. Unless we think that those are those Gentiles, and in the park in Manhattan, we should go to a Yeshiva League game and watch what's going on in the stands and the chanting that goes on and the relationship and the strutting and the posturing and the ride. It's all from a different place, and it's from an unbelievably destructive place. And the ones who suffer the most are our children, are ourselves, are our community, because we are so influenced by destructive midos instead of constructive midos, and losing ourselves and losing any sense of proportion in terms of the value is really important. Tickets for Knicks games, and what would I give up? I'd give my right arm to see the Knicks win a championship. That's probably not that good. Probably should have bigger aspirations for our right arm and the tefillin that at least lefties wear on it, and we should have bigger aspirations for our right arm than giving it up so that Jalen Brunson can hold up a trophy, as great as Jalen Brunson is.
I'm getting the sense that you're a Knicks fan. Am I right?
I'm a basketball fan to the exclusion of having a favorite. It's a very bizarre thing. I'm passionate about the NBA and I never had a favorite team. Because I'm from New York, I have a connection with the Knicks, but I will not be jumping on the bandwagon. I love this version of the team tremendously. I think they really play basketball the right way, and it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. So I'm rooting for them for sure. But I'm actually not a crazy Knicks fan. Bigger fan of the NBA than any team. I rooted for Jordan. I rooted for Stockton and Malone. Rooted for Grant Hill. Rooted for some of the great Duke. Just love watching beautiful basketball.
It's funny because by the time people are watching this, obviously who won the NBA Finals. But we're sitting here right now, as you said before Game 4, and obviously this is what a lot of basketball people are talking about. But to a lot of the points that you were saying, basketball has, not even basketball, sports in general has taken over in so many ways. And my next thought to you is someone who's in a very, I guess you could say, leadership position within our community, especially the youth. Are there things that you hope that we could kind of work on with the next generation? Or do you feel like we're at a point where it's essentially like there's no going back? Like it is what it is, and we can't fight it.
I'm very, very optimistic. I believe strongly in our educational system and what we're capable of imparting if we're willing to try. I believe in the audience that we have. No one should be written off. There is such greatness in this is not like a cliche or a bumper sticker. We human beings are incredible. Jews are incredible. Yidden are really, that song is moving. And so, doesn't have to be any more than that. We are great. We are certainly born with the capacity for the most incredible greatness and the means to achieve that by genuine connection to our tradition, to our Masorah, to our Torah. I will never, ever, ever lose confidence in that. That's a form of Misa, and it's a terrible and tortuous type of death to go through, to lose confidence in any of those things. It happens. It happens to a lot of people, and there's misery that surrounds it. But there's one thing I said earlier that I think is also the great source of confidence. In as much as we accelerate towards nonsense and towards craziness, and as broken as the system is, underneath that all is an unbelievable thirst for something better and for something different. Part of the reason why people are so exaggerated in their passion for the Knicks, as this week's example is, or rooting for the World Cup, if you're of a different sports fandom and caring about that, is coming from a place of, I've got to invest in something. I've got to believe in something. And if I don't have anything else to believe in, so it runs its course like that. But the ultimate desire to experience that degree of exhilaration, that degree of excellence, that degree of victory, that degree of meaning. So again, it'll be a meandering road, and it won't be through, it might not be on the first try. It might take realizing that the Knicks was a great ride, but it did not provide me with meaning in my life unless I take some of the fundamental values and apply them to something, unless my marriage is stronger because of the lessons that I learned from the relationship between Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart. Okay, there's such a world in which you do that, and then the Knicks become, again, a stepping stone to making everything better. And there's a world in which that could absolutely happen, and where we can do that. But more likely, it'll take a little bit more time, and it'll make us sticking to our guns and staying on course and communicating. These are our values, and these are the keys to happiness. These are the keys to fulfillment in this world.
I think it's a really good point that you said, is that it's not that we have to look at it as what you were alluding to earlier. Rabbi Leibowitz, I did hear that speech that he gave in YU. I listened to it twice, and he had a lot of good points of would it be better off if we didn't, touch a basketball, a football, or anything in the Jewish community. But what you were saying is that it's a stepping stone. It's not that you have to look at it and say it's all or nothing. Either you do it or you don't. But it's, let's take this in a way that you could apply all those things to your Avodas Hashem and to your Judaism. And obviously there's so much overlap.
One of the things that I loved about what Rabbi Leibowitz said was that he asked that question, but he did not answer it. And I think the reason why he did it is because he was challenging us, and that's very important also. And I also think he was acknowledging the fact that there could be an answer that says sports are amazing for us, but we have to own up to the fact that there's also a reality that it could be damaging to us and be unhelpful to us. And I think that was part of the genius of what he did. He was not there ranting about sports, saying, look, when we do it wrong, it probably does create a situation where it's better had we not touched it in the first place.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that point. And by the way, if anybody wants to see this speech, hopefully shout out producer Yitzi behind the scenes. I'll remember to send you a link before this episode goes out so people can check that out. And as we slowly end off this conversation, and obviously with everything that we discussed today, people hopefully have a greater understanding of who you are and what you've done within the community, and also the way you think a little bit. But whoever's listening to this podcast, at whatever stage they're at in life, if you had one message that was like, keep this message with you for the rest of your life and take it with you every day, what would that be?
Wow. That's some kind of question. A person should not have to think that long about what that answer is supposed to be. Learn a Torah that is going to be there for you when you need it most. In times of challenge, in times of difficulty, in times of confusion. Let Torah be the guide that it was meant to be. I often say to young educators that everybody pursues in the Torah that they teach relevance. A lot of people don't know how to do it, and even more people don't know what the word means. In the teenage space, many young folks believe that the word relevance, and they'll even get this wrong in their SATs, means interesting. Tell me something that I can relate to in the sense that I want to hear about it. I like sports, so if you can teach me a piece of Gemara and give me an analogy to sports, that makes it relevant. But that's not what relevance means. Relevance means that the Torah that I learn is impactful for the life that I'm living. And that's so much of what we've spoken about up until now. That's the Torah that I learned from my parents. It's the Torah that I learned from my mentors. I have a now family with Rabbi Yisrael Kamenetsky. He was first this advisor, big brother to me in Teaneck, New Jersey in the 1980s. It's the only Torah that I've ever learned from him, a Torah that informs upon and guides, everything that we do. Learn a Torah that will be your constant companion and guide, and especially will be there when you need it most.
Phenomenal advice, and hopefully, obviously, I take that one. But if anybody's listening to this, especially the guys in NCSY Kollel, take that one with you if you haven't heard it already from Rabbi Benovitz. This has been a really awesome conversation, and getting to do this, obviously, times two. For those that know, they know. It's just been awesome to hang out and spend a little bit of time, and hopefully by the time this episode comes out, it's as we're doing a lot of fun things together in the summer. So thank you so much.
Cannot wait for the summer, and thanks for the opportunity. I'll sit with you anytime, mics or no mics, and talk about all of it and bring it all home.